Woe to the obstinate children. So we just got done talking about this woe being reversed and Jacob no longer being ashamed. But you know how these things go. We cycle back and forth between all the, that's just how these prophets work. That's how their minds work. That's how they deliver their messages. You don't have you don't have like a linear line of thought that goes from beginning to end. It just doesn't do that. Okay, it's like we'll say something, and then we'll say a woe, we'll say a series of woes, and then we'll say a series of blessings, and then we'll say a series of woes again. Like there's no like end point to the line of thought. So we're back to the woes. We're not done with the woes yet. We still have several more of these to go. Woe to we're only in Isaiah 30, for example. This section goes to chapter 35. Woe to the obstinate children, declares the Lord, to those who carry out plans that are not mine, forming an alliance, but not by my spirit, heaping sin upon sin, who go down to Egypt without consulting me, who look for help to Pharaoh's protection, to Egypt's shade for refuge. So this is clearly talking about the alliance with Egypt as being the source of the woe. Now in chapter 28, we talked about, in chapter 28 verse 15, it talked about boasting and entering into a covenant with death. That could be referring to the same thing here. This could all be one long passage that all goes together, that Isaiah is speaking all at once. Or it could be a series of them that he spoke at different times and then stitched together to be in this form as he wrote it down at some later point. I don't know, okay? That's just one of those things, it's impossible to parse through that. So the covenant with death in 28 could be a reference to the alliance with Egypt here, which is clearly mentioned in chapter 30. Or it could be a reference to other alliances. Again, maybe even the alliance with Assyria itself that Ahaz formed earlier on, and that Hezekiah inherited and eventually tried to throw off. I just don't know. But Pharaoh's protection will be to your shame. Egypt's shade will bring you disgrace. Though they have officials in Zone, that's the Egyptian capital at this point in time, and their envoys have arrived in Hanes, that's some other city farther south in Egypt, everyone will be put to shame because of a people useless to them, who bring neither help nor advantage, but only shame and disgrace. So the Egyptians are not going to help you. They're putting their faith in Egypt, but that's not what they should be putting their faith in. An oracle concerning the animals of the Negev. The Negev was that wilderness area in the southern area parts of Judah. Through a land of hardship and distress, a land of lions and lionesses, of adders and darting snakes, the envoys carry their riches on donkeys' backs, their treasures on the humps of camels, to that unprofitable nation. So these are the messengers that are being sent to Egypt with the payment for their alliance, which they've got on the donkeys' backs. So they're going to that unprofitable nation, to Egypt, whose help is utterly useless. Therefore I call her Rahab the Do-Nothing. Rahab was a word for Egypt. Rahab is also a word for that Leviathan creature that we read about earlier. Leviathan and Rahab are both referred to as, are both used to refer to the giant sea monster that God deals with, that stands for the forces of chaos that are against his act of creation. And Rahab can also be used as a word for Egypt. So therefore I call her Rahab the Do-Nothing. Go now, write it on a tablet for them, inscribe it on a scroll, that for the days to come it may be an everlasting witness. You remember how back when Ahab's second son was born, Mahar-shalal-Hashbaz, Ahaz prophesied about it ahead of time. He pointed to a young woman, probably a woman he was about to be married to, or maybe already was married to, and said she's going to give seed and give birth and have a son, and by the time that son is a certain age, then the kings of the lands that you're fearing will be laid waste. how after that God told him to take a scroll and write on it the words Mahar Shalal Hashbaz, and then have witnesses observe it and confirm it to say that this happened. And then after the son was born, he was told to name him Mahar Shalal Hashbaz as a confirmation of his words. And the scroll that was written ahead of time was written to prove that Isaiah gave this message before it happened, so that no one can deny that God spoke it before it happened, and that God's word was proven true when it happened. Same thing here. He's being told to write this down on a tablet and a scroll, so that in the future days, they can't deny that Isaiah told them about this ahead of time, or that God, through Isaiah, told them about this ahead of time. These are rebellious people, deceitful children, children unwilling to listen to the Lord's instruction. They say to the seers, "See no more visions," and to the prophets, "Give us no more visions of what is right." So stop telling us the things we don't want to hear. Stop showing us the things we don't want to see. That goes again all the way back to what he said in the day when he was first given his call. To go to the people who will be ever seeing, never perceiving, ever hearing, but never understanding. It's the same thing. Tell us pleasant things. Prophesy illusions. Leave this way, get off this path, and stop confronting us with the Holy One of Israel. Therefore, this is what the Holy One of Israel said. He's not going to do that. He's not going to stop confronting them with what the Holy One of Israel is telling them. Because you have rejected this message, relied on oppression, and depended on deceit, this sin will become for you like a high wall, cracked and bulging, that collapses suddenly in an instant. I had a basement problem a few years ago, where water was coming in through the basement. It was coming in through the floors, like, through the cracks in the floors, or however you define it. And it was filling up in the walls. I had concrete blocks in my basement, and you could see that they were filling up with water somehow. Now we found the source of the water. It was a leaky fire hydrant, so it was the city's own fault for flooding they were flooding our entire yard. It wasn't just the basement. Our entire yard was basically becoming an Olympic swimming pool. We even had a sinkhole form at the foot of our driveway because the ground was getting so soft out there. Well, and that was a problem. Okay, that was a major catastrophic problem. We finally got the water out. We finally put a pump in there. They fixed the fire hydrant. We got that taken care of. But even then, I had a ruined the basement. That took me 2.5 years to clean up. But the good news was the walls never started to bulge. Okay, the walls themselves, yes, they got filled with water. They got wet. But it didn't damage them to the point where they started to bulge. So I was never that afraid, because we never had the walls of the basement never started to come in. And some people have basement walls that are bulging. When your walls start to bulge, you have a problem. So this sin will become for you like a high wall, cracked and bulging, that collapses suddenly in an instant. It will break in pieces like pottery, shattered so mercilessly that among its pieces not a fragment will be found, for taking coals from a hearth or scooping water out of a cistern. So it's going to be destroyed. It's going to be completely shattered to pieces. The pieces are going to be so small. The pot is going to be shattered so thoroughly and utterly that none of the pieces are even going to be useful for being a fragment, for taking coals out of a hearth or scooping water out of a cistern. That's how thoroughly broken it will be. This is what the Sovereign Lord, the Holy One of Israel, says. In repentance and rest is your salvation. In quietness and trust is your strength. But you would have none of it. You said, no, we will flee on horses. Therefore you will flee. I'm assuming that's referring to going down to Egypt to ask for help. Therefore you will flee. So you want to flee on horses? You're going to flee. You said, we will ride off on swift horses. Therefore your pursuers will be swift. You're going to get what you want. This is what you want, you're going to get what you want. God will let you have what you want. And then when that happens, you're going to wonder whether or not you ever really wanted it. 1,000 will flee at the threat of one. At the threat of 5, you will all flee away. This goes all the way back to the covenant of blessing and cursing they received when they received the law. Let's take a look here, a couple different places. Two separate times in Moses' words to them, he gives them these rewards for obedience and punishment for disobedience, starting at the end of Leviticus 26 and 27, actually 26. Let's see if I can find the specific verse. Leviticus 26, verse 36. As for those of you who are left, I will make, and this is assuming you're continuing your disobedience, you're persisting in your foolish fight against God. I will make their hearts so fearful in the lands of their enemies that the sound of a wind-blown leaf will put them to flight. They will run as though fleeing from the sword, and they will fall even though no one is pursuing them. They will stumble over one another as though fleeing from the sword, even though no one is pursuing them. So you will not be able to stand before your enemies. And then later he says basically the same thing again. In Deuteronomy 28, verse 25, the Lord will cause you to be defeated before your enemies. You will come at them from one direction, but flee from them in 7. So that's basically, this is covenant terminology here we're talking about. 1,000 will flee at the threat of 1. At the threat of 5, you will all flee away. So you are left like a flagstaff on a mountaintop, like a banner on a hill. Yet the Lord longs to be gracious to you. He rises to show you compassion. For the Lord is a God of justice. Blessed are all who wait for him. O people of Zion, who live in Jerusalem, you will weep no more. How gracious he will be when you cry for help. As soon as he hears, he will answer you. Although the Lord gives down, this will happen when Hezekiah calls out to God. We'll actually read about this next time when we get to the historical chapters of 36 and 37, which we've already read. We read about that before, but we'll read it again next time. So this will happen when Hezekiah prays to God for deliverance, and God will answer him. Although the Lord gives you the bread of adversity and the water of affliction, your teachers will be hidden no more. With your own eyes you will see them. Whether you turn to the right or the left, your ears will hear a voice behind you saying, "This is the way. Walk in it." Then you will defile your idols overlaid with silver, and your images covered with gold. You will throw them away like a minstrel cloth, and say to them, "Away with you!" You're finally going to get rid of these things that were a sin to you. He will also send you rain for the seed you sow in the ground, and the food that comes from the land will be rich and plentiful. And that day your cattle will graze in broad meadows. The oxen and donkeys that work the soil will eat fodder and mash spread out with fork and shovel. And the day of great slaughter, when the towers fall, streams of water will flow on every high mountain and every lofty hill. The moon will shine like the sun, and the sun's light will be 7 times brighter, like the light of 7 full days, when the Lord binds up the bruises of his people and heals the wounds he inflicted. See, the name of the Lord comes from afar, with burning anger and dense clouds of smoke. His lips are full of wrath, and his tongue is a consuming fire. His breath is like a rushing torrent, rising up to the neck. Now earlier, we referred to the coming Assyrian scourge as a river flooding up to the neck. This is when Isaiah was confronting Ahaz. Ahaz already probably had made up his mind that he was going to ask the king of Assyria for help and pay tribute to him. And so Isaiah talks about the king of Assyria, chapter 8, verse 7. The Lord is about to bring against them the mighty flood waters of the river, the king of Assyria with all his pomp. He's coming against the northern kingdom of Israel and Aram first. It will overflow its channels and run over its banks and sweep on into Judah, swirling over it, passing through it, and reaching up to the neck. There it's the king of Assyria doing that. Here it's God, who was, of course, using the king of Assyria as a tool. His breath is like a rushing torrent rising up to the neck. He shakes the nations in the sieve of destruction. He places in the jaws of the peoples a bit that leads them astray. It's like a bridle you put them in horses to guide them around, and Assyrians would put these things in people's faces, similar things in people's faces, and tug them around that way. And you will sing as on the night you celebrate a holy festival. Your hearts will rejoice as when people go up with flutes to the mountain of the Lord. Remember, they were supposed to come to Israel or Jerusalem 3 times a year for their festivals. They were supposed to go there to offer their sacrifices too, but the nation as a whole was supposed to go up there 3 times a year for their festivals. So your hearts are going to rejoice as you do when you're going for a festival, or when you're going up with flutes to the mountain of the Lord, to the rock of Israel. The Lord will cause men to hear his majestic voice, and will make them see his arm coming down. There's a hearing and seeing imagery that's so common in Isaiah. With raging anger and consuming fire, with cloudbursts, thunderstorm, and hail, the voice of the Lord will shatter Assyria. With his scepter he will strike them down. Every stroke the Lord lays on them with his punishing rod will be to the music of tambourines and harps, as he fights them in battle with the blows of his arm. Topheth has long been prepared. It has been made ready for the king. Its fire pit has been made deep and wide, with an abundance of fire and wood. The breath of the Lord, like a stream of burning sulfur, sets it ablaze. Now, we're going to talk more about this Topheth place later. Let's just say for now it's kind of like a code word for hell. In the valley south of Jerusalem, there was a place where they set up a fire pit where they sacrificed their children during the times when they practiced human sacrifice, which they did from time to time. And they would sacrifice their children in this fire, in this valley, in this fire pit that they had set up in this valley, which is called Topheth. So here, and the evil kings would do this. Ahaz, an evil king, did this. Not all the kings did this. In fact, relatively few of them did. The good kings, of course, did not do this. And even some of the bad kings didn't do this. But Ahaz did do this. So Ahaz has already probably been king by this point. Okay, this prophecy is probably being given in the days of Hezekiah after Ahaz. So they would already have the context in their minds of taking their children to this place in the valley called Topheth and burning them up. So here we're saying that Topheth is going to be prepared for these kings. The king of Assyria in this case. Now actually, the king of Assyria does not end up getting burned in the valley in Topheth. Okay. So this prophecy does not get fulfilled literally, because the Assyrian king, at least, does not die in this upcoming battle and does not get burned in the valley. Now, it could be that some of the Assyrian soldiers were burned there, maybe if the Israelites picked them up afterwards. But we're talking here specifically about the king, and the king of Assyria does not, in fact, get burned up in this valley. So it's not referring to a literal fulfillment. But Topheth is basically the spot in the valley south of Jerusalem where they would burn their children in the fire. And later, and this is basically where the concept of hell, as we understand it, is going to come from. This idea of burning people alive in this valley of fire. this imagery is going to be the basis of what we will call hell. And it is a hell. I mean, this is what this is. The imagery of hell is referring to something specific. It does exist. But it's not what we think of it as a place of spiritual fire. Okay, it's actually a place of literal physical fire, where in Jesus' day they used it as a trash dump to burn their trash. In this day and time, the evil kings used it as a place to practice human sacrifice. And we call it Topheth. But we will be reading more about Topheth as time goes on. Woe to those who go down. I'm going to go ahead and do this next chapter too, because it's basically continuing the same thought as the previous one. We're not done with this woe to those who rely on Egypt oracle. Woe to those who go down to Egypt for help, who rely on horses, which we just got done criticizing them for riding on horses, who trust in the multitude of their chariots and the great strength of their horsemen, but do not look to the Holy One of Israel, or seek help from the Lord. Now, they were told not to do this. This is something else that they were expressly told not to do. In Deuteronomy 17, Moses says this. He says this about their future. In Deuteronomy 17, starting in verse 14, when you enter the land the Lord your God is giving you, and you have taken possession of it, and settled in it, you will say, let us set a king over us like all the nations around us. Be sure to appoint over you the king the Lord your God chooses. He must be from your own brothers. Do not place it, blah, 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 blah. The king, moreover, here's the thing we need to read here in this context, must not acquire great numbers of horses for himself, or make the people return to Egypt to get more of them. For the Lord has told you, you are not to go back that way again. He must not take many wives, or his heart will be led astray, and must not accumulate large amounts of silver. So we are directly disobeying his command to gather horses and chariots and go back to Egypt. We're doing these things specifically against what he directly commanded us not to do. So woe to us for doing that. Woe to those who go down to Egypt for help, violating a direct command of God, who rely on horses, violating a direct command from God, who trust in the multitude of their chariots and the great strength of their horsemen, violating a direct command from God. But on top of doing all of this, directly violating the commands of God, they do not look to the Holy One of Israel or seek help from Jehovah. Yet he too is wise and can bring disaster. He does not take back his words. He will rise up against the house of the wicked, against those who help evildoers. But the Egyptians are men and not God. Their horses are flesh and not spirit. When the Lord stretches out his hand, he who helps will stumble. He who is helped, that'd be Judah. The Egyptians are supposed to be the helpers here, and Judah are the ones who are being helped, will fall. Both will perish together. This is what the Lord says to me. As a lion growls, as a great lion over his prey, and though a whole band of shepherds is called together against him, he is not frightened by their shouts or disturbed by their clamor. So the Lord Almighty will come down to do battle on Mount Zion and on its heights. Now God compares himself to the voice of the lion in Amos as well. When we read Amos in fact starts off by talking about a lion and comparing God to a lion. The very first thing he says about God in Amos chapter 1 verse 2, he said, the Lord roars from Zion and thunders from Jerusalem. He's comparing God to a lion right from the start. Like birds hovering overhead, the Lord Almighty will shield Jerusalem. He will shield it and deliver it. He will pass over it and will rescue it. He's going to come down and do battle on Zion's behalf like a lion, and he's going to protect them like birds circling around Jerusalem. Return to him whom you have so greatly revolted against, O Israelites. For in that day every one of you will reject the idols of silver and gold your sinful hands have made. Assyria will fall by a sword that is not of man, a sword not of mortals, will devour them. It'll be the angel of the Lord. We already read about that. We'll read about that again when we get to this in a few chapters from now. Next time. We'll get to that tomorrow. They will flee before the sword, and their young men will be put to forced labor. Their stronghold will fall because of terror. At sight of the battle standard, their commanders will panic, declares the Lord, whose fire is in Jerusalem, whose fire is in Zion, whose furnace is in Jerusalem. So there goes that the imagery of fire by judgment. Topheth, we're going back to what we mentioned at the end of the previous chapter, referring to fire and burning up an offering, a sacrifice, a living offering, a sacrifice. So his fire, God has his own fire in Jerusalem, in Zion, his furnace in Jerusalem. So God is going to deliver you from the Assyrians. The Egyptians are not.